President Moon Jae-in has given the final budget proposal speech of his administration, urging lawmakers to pass his government's proposed budget for next year, worth over $510 billion. The budget will be used to achieve a complete recovery from the pandemic and to prepare for the post-pandemic era. Our Blue House correspondent Kim Min-ji walks us through some of the key points of his speech.
President Moon Jae-in says South Korea will be gradually returning to normal life starting November, now that more than 70% of the population has been fully vaccinated. In a speech Monday for the final budget of his administration, he vowed to do his best until the last day of his term for the country's complete recovery from the pandemic.
아직 끝나지 않았습니다. 마지막까지 위기 극복에 전념하여 완전한 일상 회복과 경제 회복을 이루는데 최선을 다하겠습니다.
President Moon said that the country will continue taking basic prevention measures such as wearing masks, while relaxing restrictions for businesses and letting schools open as normal. He pledged to create a successful model for returning to normal life that, like Korea's antivirus measures, can become a model for the world. The president also vowed to spare no efforts to support the hardest hit people, saying that the government will leave no one behind in achieving an inclusive recovery. Moon also renewed his pledge to push forward with carbon neutrality, the Korean New Deal, and support next-generation industries. To that end, he highlighted the need to maintain an expansionary fiscal budget next year, proposed at a record high of over $510 billion. Moon brushed off concerns about fiscal soundness, saying that this year's tax revenue is expected to be bigger than originally forecast.
완전한 회복을 위해 아직 가야 할 길이 멉니다. 선도형 경제로 전환하는 적기를 놓쳐서도 안 될 것입니다. 내년에도 재정의 역할이 클 수밖에 없습니다. 정부는 추가 확보된 세수를 활용하여 국민들의 어려움을 추가로 덜어드리면서 일부를 국가 채무 상환에 활용함으로써 재정 건전성 개선에도 기여할 수 있을 것으로 기대하고 있습니다.
On North Korea, Moon vowed continued efforts for dialogue and diplomacy to achieve peace and prosperity on the Korean peninsula. There has been no significant progress since the Pyongyang-Washington summit in 2019 ended without a deal, and North Korea has been unresponsive to calls for dialogue.
아직 대화는 미완성입니다. 대화와 외교를 통해 한반도의 평화와 번영을 위한 새로운 질서가 만들어지도록 끝까지 노력하겠습니다.
He also pledged efforts to deal with the real estate issue, calling it the biggest reform task related to people's livelihoods. Despite a series of government measures, home prices have continued to soar, and people are still borrowing. Last but not least, Moon vowed to do all he can to repay the people in the remaining 6 months of his term, thanking them for their efforts in overcoming the crisis and putting South Korea where it stands now. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.